I remember the way Thorn looked at him. It wasn't hatred. That is the thing that stays with me. The complete lack of any real malice. We were on the bridge of the Krell flagship, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone and the sharp metallic tang of spent cooling vents. Thorn reached out slow, steady, and placed a hand on Vax's shoulder. I saw it myself. The way Vax's high-collared uniform, all gold and stiff pride, seemed to wilt under that single touch. You could hear the hum of the Solari ship outside, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. Vax was shaking. He wasn't just afraid, he was shattered. He looked up at Thorn, his eyes wide and stinging, and I realized then that mercy is the ultimate weapon of the truly powerful. I don't think they even noticed me standing there in the corner, just a witness to the moment the galaxy changed. But look, it didn't start with that kind of quiet, not even close. A few hours earlier, the Krell hegemony felt like the absolute center of the universe. I was there on the observation deck when Vax laughed. He actually laughed. He called the Solari consensus cowards, mocking their refusal to engage as a sign of some deep-seated fear. Truth is, we all did in a way. The Solari ships looked like polished glass, drifting through the quiet reach like they were afraid to wake the stars. Vax kept talking about how shields are paper before the storm of iron, but he had it all backward. He thought he was the iron. He thought their stillness was a surrender. I remember the heat of the bridge and the electric spark of skin meeting metal as my fingers gripped the command railing, watching Vax puff out his chest. Then the first Solari wing moved. It wasn't a graceful dance. It was a surgical strike. I don't know, maybe we should have seen it coming. The Solari didn't use lasers or energy beams that our shields could just drink up. No, they used kinetic slugs, raw, heavy matter. Antimatter payloads that defied every law of Krell physics. I watched the holograms flicker as the armada started to vanish, one ship at a time. It was a massacre disguised as a skirmish. That is when the mood changed. The air in the room spiked in temperature as the reactors groaned. Vax's lower lip started to tremble. He realized too late that you should always beware the monk who hides a thunderbolt. I remember the thud of the heart mine, or maybe the ship's as the hull groaned under the pressure. We were the predators, or so we thought. But as the Solari railgun barrages tore through our fleet in minutes, it became clear that their pacifism wasn't a lack of ability. It was a mercy born of absolute lethality. I saw Vax's hand hover over the tactical display, his fingers twitching. He wanted to fight, but there was nothing left to fight with. The Krell hegemony was falling apart, and all I could do was watch as the man who claimed to be a god began to realize he was just a man who had made a very, very loud mistake. I watched Thorn's thumb press just slightly against the gold embroidery of Vax's collar, a small gesture that felt louder than the railgun fire that had just ended a century of Krell dominance. The room went still, but it wasn't quiet. There was this constant low-frequency thrum from the Solari ships outside, a sound that felt like it was vibrating right through the marrow of my bones. I remember the heat of it, the way the bridge felt like it was baking under the proximity of so much raw, controlled power. Vax didn't move. He just stared at the hand on his shoulder like it was a ghost. Truth is, I think he was waiting for the blow. He was waiting for the Solari to finally show the cruelty he had spent his whole life practicing. But Thorn just stood there. I saw the way his eyes tracked the flickering readouts on the ruined consoles, red lights blinking like dying stars. Look, you have to understand that Vax had spent years building a reputation on being dangerous, yet here he was, looking like a child who had accidentally pulled a mountain down on his own head. The stinging behind his eyes was obvious from where I stood. He had miscalculated everything. He thought the Solari were harmless because they chose peace, but standing there, inches from Thorn, the reality finally hit him. Harmlessness isn't a virtue. It's just a lack of options. Thorn had all the options in the galaxy, and he chose to just be there. I don't know, maybe Vax expected a speech, but Thorn finally spoke, and his voice was as steady as the deck beneath us. He told Vax that the war was over, not because the Krell had lost, but because the Solari had decided they were done allowing it to happen. I saw the electric spark of a short-circuiting panel nearby, a tiny blue flash that illuminated the wetness on Vax's cheeks. The High Archon's hands were trembling so hard he had to grip the edge of his command chair to stay upright. And that's the moment I'll never forget, when Thorn leaned in, his face inches from the man who had tried to burn his world, and whispered something about the storm of iron. Vax's knees finally gave out. He sank into his chair, the once proud Krell leader looking small and fragile in a room full of smoke and the smell of hot copper. He handed over the command codes with a shaking hand, his fingers brushing against Thorn's skin. I saw Thorn flinch just a little, not out of fear, but out of a kind of deep, weary pity. It was a victory of the heart, I suppose, though it felt more like a heavy lesson being carved into the soul of an empire. The ship didn't just feel empty as the Solari began their boarding parties. It felt light, like the weight of 1,000 years of arrogance had just evaporated. I remember walking toward the viewport, looking out at the quiet reach. The Krell armada was gone, replaced by the shimmering, crystalline shapes of the Solari fleet. I think they knew I was watching. I think they wanted someone to remember the way Vax looked when he realized that mercy wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the ultimate proof of strength. Truth is, the most effective weapon really is the one you never have to fire twice. I saw it myself. I was there when the thunderbolt finally went back into the clouds, and the galaxy started to breathe again.